at least until arrangements have been worked out for their participation under agreed terms within a unified command. And it is this command structure which has been a grey area and the most sensitive element between NATO and Russia. The Deputy Secretary of State, US Secretary of State Stroll Tolbert, who left Moscow originally this morning, is now on his way back to the Russian capital. Now that's according to diplomatic sources in Moscow. And we're hearing from Tanjug. Tanjug is the Yugoslav news agency of the arrival of a Russian military convoy. Now the first part they're talking about of a Russian military contingent entered Fried territory over the Parvavica Bridge across the Drina. They will be deployed in Kosovo as part of the UN mission there. Now, Al Gore, just before we...
The final farewell.
Well, let's go straight to Keith Graves, who's our correspondent in Macedonia. Keith, what can you tell us? What's going on?
I can tell you that the first of the British spearhead armoured units are about to leave. We're just about to head for the border. In the front is Household Cavalry Regiment Medium Recce Unit, one of their squadrons in scimitar armoured vehicles. They are going to go up ahead very fast, and then following them will be the what the Army calls the heavy metal. It's the King's Royal Hussars battle group with their Challenger battle tanks and Warrior armoured vehicles. They are just setting off and will be at the border within the next hour and a half, they hope, and they will cross straight over. There's a lot of discussion going on at the moment about whether or not this airborne brigade, which was going to go in when things were running somewhat more smoothly than they are now, they were going to go in and secure the high ground. They haven't left yet, and the suggestion here is that in their haste to get British troops in, they've now decided that they will not go in, that there will be, perhaps throwing caution a little bit to the winds, that they will get in as quickly as they can and start moving north. There is a bit of a competition going on here between the British armoured spearhead and the US Marines, who are also heading for the border at this stage. They've got much lighter vehicles. They're not using armour. They're trying to get to the border before the British. It's become that farcical. But the first British units are about to move off very shortly now and head for Kosovo.
Jeremy, what's your information?
Well, I'm hearing it mainly from Keith Graves at the moment. We're still waiting at the border. This is where the first troops from the K4 force will go in. And if what Keith is seeing just back a few miles into Macedonia, down towards Skopje, is right, then I imagine we'll start seeing the advanced troops starting to pass by here in the next hour or so. Difficult to know at the moment. There's a little bit of heightened activity amongst the military. There is a forward base here, mainly Italian, some British. They've been largely involved in talks with Yugoslav soldiers and Yugoslav officials or Kosovan administrators over the last couple of hours, presumably trying to iron out some of the details of just what the K4 force will find when it gets in across the border, less than a mile down there, once it gets inside Kosovo. It seems likely that the first we may well see would be helicopters going in, taking paratroopers and taking perhaps American Marines in to secure the ridges that, as Keith said, have already been wrecked by special forces over the last day or so. But apart from that sort of activity, I don't know whether we can see just right down towards the little building at the end of the street here is where the actual Macedonian border crossing is. There's a load of coaches there. Now, the point of the coaches is that they've actually arrived to take the refugees away from the refugee camp at the bottom of the road there. There's still several hundred refugees down there. Clearly the NATO force would be pleased if the refugees were moved to somewhere safer. There's another coach going by us now. We understand at least 1,000 refugees there, and they, of course, have been in that holding camp, or they've been using that holding camp ever since the air campaign started. Every time there is a new intake of refugees, they are passed and monitored through that refugee camp. Now, really, they want all that cleared in case there is any sort of military action that takes place as the NATO force enters Kosovo.
Jeremy, if these rumours, or if indeed what Keith Graves is seeing of a ridiculous race happening in Macedonia are true, I mean, he was talking there about Chinook helicopters leapfrogging British tanks. Who are the winners and losers in all this? Surely the soldiers who've got to go in there first.
The soldiers are going to have to do their job, whatever the political undertones that are going on here. The soldiers are simply going to have to get on and do their job. We know that from the British point of view and their European partners within NATO, that they're extremely well trained, extremely well prepared, ready to go. Many of the British troops have been here for 2 or 3 months now. They've been going over and over and over again the sort of plans that they will have to make, the plans that they will have to enforce once they get into Kosovo. This first operation, of course, to clear the highway between here and Pristina, about 50 miles up the road from this border crossing point. So they will get on with that job. I'm sure they'll let the military commanders worry about the political niceties of what's right and wrong and who goes in first. They're pretty focused from what we've seen, and when we've been talking to the soldiers, they know the job they have to do. They're going to get on and do that, and I'm sure that they probably are barely aware of what's been going on politically over the last 24 hours.
Well, little activity where you
get past there, and it was extremely busy. There's normal traffic on the road. They've got to then pass the Stankovic refugee camp, where there's always a lot of activity. I mean, you talk about 30 or 40,000 refugees, people going in and out of the camps all the time. And it's one narrow, winding road that comes up into this gorge where we are on the border post here before they can make the entry through the customs post just down the road and on into Kosovo. So it really is a bottleneck, and it's a bottleneck the other side, which they're going to have to face about 12 kilometers before they can get up the gorge, over the bridges, through the tunnels, and finally out into the more open countryside that will take them up the road 50 miles into the capital, Pristina. So no sign of them here yet, and in fact the road behind me by the border post is currently blocked by about a dozen or so coaches waiting to take away the last of the refugees which have been held in that holding camp right alongside the border, right next to that railway line where you can probably remember back 80 days now to when those first refugees came traipsing up the railway line in huge numbers. Well, most of those refugees have long moved on, but it's been a holding point, and there are still some 1,000 or so refugees down there. They want to try and bust those out, and at the moment they are blocking the road. Until they go, there's not much hope of tanks or warrior armoured vehicles getting past. So I assume they will disappear before we see the troops coming up the road. And as I said, we imagine from all that we've been told so far that we'll probably hear the sound of helicopters first before we see more troops on the road. I mean, we really don't know that, and we know, all that we know so far is the Russians are right in that northeast corner of Kosovo, probably north of Pristina, somewhere near the border with Serbia itself. So I don't think there is much likely to be early contact between the bulk of the NATO force here and the Russian forces that have gone in. What the Russian forces encounter with either the KLA or perhaps even with any Serb paramilitaries that are left in there that have chosen not to withdraw with the Yugoslav army itself, I mean, that if there are contacts of a military kind there, it may give us here some indication of what the bulk of the NATO force going from here is likely to encounter. But I think, as we were saying before, certainly the British forces are extremely well prepared. They're ready to go. They knew they'd be going about now. They will probably be not hugely aware of what's been going on at the top echelons of military command about the leapfrogging that is likely to go on with the Americans and with the Russians at the other end of the country. They'll be sticking to their jobs. They'll be pretty focused, and I imagine that they've been preparing and planning for this for many months now. They know what they have to do. They know how tough it's going to be to take away.
States' wish to be first into Kosovo has been thwarted. British and German forces are now said to be moving towards the province's border ahead of the US Marines, whose main contingent has been in Macedonia just 24 hours. There's been real anger among British and other European troops at what's being seen as Washington's less than subtle attempt to lead the way and steal the glory. Accusations that President Clinton is manipulating the peacekeeping initiative for his own political ends have left a bitter taste. This morning, some 150 Russian troops crossed the border from Bosnia into Yugoslavia, an advance party for a larger force. In Moscow, Foreign Minister Igor Ivanov met US Special Envoy Strobe Talbot to discuss Russia's contribution to the peacekeeping effort. Talbot's now stayed on there, seeking to clarify just what Russia's intentions are. This is the planned timetable for the peacekeeping forces' push into Kosovo. Phase 1, the first 12 hours, will see them take Kačanik, the main town across the border from Macedonia. In Phase 2, which could take up to 2 days, they hope to secure mountain regions around the town. When that's achieved, they'll start moving the bulk of KFOR into the rest of Kosovo. And by day 10, NATO should be ready to divide the province into 5 sectors, the largest and central sector under the control of British troops. Americans, Germans, French and Italians will patrol the other areas, with the Russian force not under direct NATO command in northeast Kosovo. Politics may have temporarily got in the way, but this afternoon it seems that process has begun, and the troops are about to start doing what they were sent to the region to do: rebuild Kosovo and make it safe again. Mark Smith, Sky News.
Kosovo, they're heading towards the Macedonia border right now. Our correspondent Keith Graves is travelling with them. Keith, you were caught up in a traffic jam in Skopje a short time ago. Is there any progress?
Well, at station, we've been told we won't be moving now for some time. The troops I'm with are on a sort of 15-minute standby, so they're sort of relaxing a bit. They've been told you'll be given 15 minutes warning when you're going to move again. I was just listening there to what Jake Lynch was saying about how, I guess, an American source is indignant at the suggestion that the Americans have been causing all sorts of problems with their demands that they should be seen to be in the forefront of this operation. I can assure that source, whoever it is, that he's probably not half as indignant as the British officers are here. There's a considerable amount of angst and anger at the way this whole thing has now been handled as far as the American point of view is concerned.
Keith, just tell us exactly how many, what form this convoy you are in is.
Well, the convoy is household cavalry with scimitar armoured vehicles. They're sort of a small tank, and then there are the battle tanks, a smaller number of battle tanks. Actually, we're off the road at the moment and in a field. And people are sort of brewing up and doing things that soldiers do. The whole thing, to me, has become, and I'm not a military man, seems to become vaguely farcical, I must say. As I think I said earlier, the reason we've been told that there is this delay is that the mayor has objected to this group of tanks, a considerable group of tanks, I must say, going through the centre of his town at a time when there's a lot of traffic around. It's just about the sort of evening rush hour here. I suppose he's got a point of view, really. It's a small, rickety town anyway. The traffic gets pretty snarled up. The roads are not very good, and if you put all these tanks whizzing through, they're going to get even worse, and the traffic's going to get even worse. But it does seem vaguely farcical that the whole operation has ground to a halt and has been halted now for about an hour, simply because they can't get through the town. They have to use a route. You'd think they'd have planned things like this long ago.
The final farewell. The Yugoslav army said its goodbyes to Čaklavica, a 100% Serb village, and to each other. They will now be dispersed throughout Serbia. Many of them were happy to get out alive after a year of war. Those they left behind, less happy. Many of the women were in tears. The gunfire didn't help. They fear there will be more in the coming months. The children waved, the adults worried.
One picture, 2 stories. To the outside world, this is the retreat, and it heralds the homecoming of the Kosovar Albanians. On the inside, to the 150,000 Serb civilians, the picture fills them with fear and dread. The revenge is coming, and already we've seen the beginnings of possibly another exodus.
We saw cars on the road with Đakovica number plates. The Serb minority there aren't waiting for the return. This man said, "Film this shame." There are no Serbs in Jakovica. The army told us they cannot guarantee our safety. He said he didn't know where he was going, and then he set off there. Other cars were coming out of Prizren. They compete for space with the heavy armour, rocket launchers and APCs. They leave behind heavy hearts. Tim Marshall, Sky News, Central Kosovo.
They're on their way. And these are pictures we are receiving live. They are coming from Stankovic, from the holding camp there, where today US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright has been greeting some of the refugees who are now preparing to return home. So these pictures from the Stankovic camp in Macedonia. Earlier today, Madeleine Albright told them that the war had been won on their behalf. Now this is the road leading up to the frontier, running right past the Stankovic refugee camp, which is one of the camps run by the British agencies and one of the holding camps for the many thousands of refugees.
Well, obviously there are preparations of sorts, military vehicles and helicopters, as you can see in the background there. And if there is any movement, of course, it's these roads which we'll witness at first, and we will, of course, go straight to them if there's any movement. But as you can see there, those trucks on the left of your screen with flashing lights are the transporters with Warrior armoured vehicles on the backs. They appear to be about to be on the move, so things certainly moving in areas where we would expect to see the start of any NATO progression towards the Kosovo border.
Well, those pictures are coming in live, not as I said earlier, obviously, of the refugee camp. They are of the holding camp, but still at Stankovic in Macedonia. And we can speak now to Jeremy, who is in Macedonia on that border of Blace. We were looking there, Jeremy, live pictures from the Stankovic camp. Vehicles are certainly looking ready to roll, but nothing coming your way yet.
No, Stankovic is about 5 miles back from the border post here where we are at Blace, and it was just in the fields opposite there that when I was driving up here earlier in the afternoon, I saw the forward holding areas where the British and American troops seem to be gathering, ready to make their advance push through up the border road here. But yet again, as I point out, on the subject of refugees, I'll just stand out the way slightly, and you can see down here that's the border post, and at the moment that whole road is blocked by coaches which have come to collect refugees, the last 1,000 or so who've been staying for the past few weeks in this holding camp right on the very border itself. Now it's quite clear that not only the United Nations but also the NATO military are pretty keen that those refugees are moved, allowing the troops to come rolling through here with tanks, armoured cars, trucks and so on, probably in the next few hours. So until they're moved, there's really not a lot that the troops can do. They're obviously being held up, as you've heard from Keith, by the Friday afternoon traffic in Skopje city, about 10 miles back down the road. There's a lot of activity around Stankovic, halfway between Skopje and here, and then you've got all these buses down at the border post. So apart from all the diplomatic and political problems that this day has brought to the never-ending saga of the Kosovo crisis, it appears that there are simple road jams of...
They are on the move. These are not the vehicles that are going to lead the way into Kosovo. These are very much supporting vehicles, they're not fighting vehicles.
But as we've been saying, it is one road, it needs to be kept clear to allow the troops to go through.
It needs to be kept clear, these vehicles can do that, but primarily these vehicles' traditional role is to bring fighting vehicles up to just behind the front line. So their move back now is significant, and if we look into the far distance in that shot, you can actually see other armoured vehicles moving. There is obviously something going on. It may well be that those vehicles moving off into the distance have been dropped off by these transporters.
Duncan Bulliphant, for now, thank you very much indeed. This is Sky News. British troops are heading for Kosovo. We'll have the latest on this next.
5 hours perhaps, as long as there is not too much getting in the way.
Apart from those renegade troops that you mentioned, Jeremy, is it known where official Serb troops are at the moment, the ones that are closest to where you are?
We don't know that. The last I saw was late last night here, when there were still Serbian military and Serbian police forces in this village just behind the General Jankovic and around there, and there was gunfire heard. There was also some burning buildings seen yesterday. We've seen no obvious sight of them today. Up on the ridges around here, there had been Yugoslav army patrols over the last few days. I haven't obviously seen any heads bobbing up on those ridges at the moment, so it may well be that they have started the retreat. A little earlier on, the NATO military commanders at a sort of mid-level were meeting their Yugoslav counterparts, and also some of the Kosovo officials from local towns and cities, provincial administrators.
Seeing buses, this presumably has to happen before any convoy is going to get down this road.
Yes, these are the refugees we're talking about who've been held in the transit camps along the border. About 20 coaches or so. They've been loading the last of the refugees held on the border here into these coaches, and the camp down there is empty now. They're going to be getting them away to places like Stankovic and Shigrani camps away down the road further into Macedonia, clearly a safe area well away from the border if there's to be any contact at all of a military nature in the next day or so. And that, once they're out the way, I have to say that there should be no reason for the NATO forces not to be able to start moving at a pace up the road here to the border crossing itself. That seems to be pretty much the last of the refugees here. So they're giving us a little wave there as they go by. They don't seem in too bad of spirits. It's probably disappointing for them to actually move back from the border just when they think it's going to be safe soon to go in, but they're going to be much safer and clearly better looked after, better fed and so on, and better medical attention, better at the more established camps where the UNHCR and the aid agencies can take care of them much better. And then they hope that before too long they'll be back in those buses and heading that way back towards their homes.
The United States' wish to be first into Kosovo has been thwarted. European NATO troops are moving towards the province ahead of the US Marines, whose main contingent has been in Macedonia just 24 hours. There's been real anger among British and other European troops at what's being seen as Washington's less than subtle attempt to lead the way and steal the glory. Accusations that President Clinton is manipulating the peacekeeping initiative for his own political ends have left a bitter taste. This morning, some 150 Russian troops crossed the border from Bosnia into Yugoslavia, an advance party for a larger force. In Moscow, Foreign Minister Igor Ivanov met US Special Envoy Strobe Talbot to discuss Russia's contribution to the peacekeeping effort. Talbot's now stayed on there, seeking to clarify just what Russia's intentions are. This is the planned timetable for the peacekeeping forces' push into Kosovo.
Time, but it's interesting, the idea that the British forces are going to race forward for the airport, because of course the Russians have said the troops they're putting on standby for their contribution to KFOR come from their airborne division based just outside Moscow. Well, if they're going to head out there, they might well try and fly straight into Pristina.
Okay, well that's the scene at the Stankovic military holding point. Well, earlier in the neighbouring refugee camp, the US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright visited the scene. This, of course, as the diplomatic action was considerable, particularly with Strobe Talbot from the United States, who was in Moscow trying to assess what was going on there after reports that Russian troops had moved into Yugoslavia this morning. And obviously refugees there relieved to see progress in this peace process. With us in the studio is Francis Tusa, our defence analyst, and of course when we're talking about a British troop movements, and indeed it's a NATO troop movement, Germans, Dutch are also involved as we speak. It's the logistics of it all, isn't it? It's the making sure they will have fuel, because these things don't do many miles per gallon.
very much the case. If you wanted to, for the sake of argument, bearing in mind the 1st Battalion Parachute Regiment and their, as well, brothers in arms, the 1st Battalion Royal Gurkha Rifles, are equipped and set up now for helicopter-borne operations, could you fly them straight into, say, Pristina Airport? Absolutely no reason why not. However, they would then, of course, be cut off from the rest of the NATO force, and the Parachute Brigade in Britain certainly has experience of being dropped a long way ahead of an armoured column, dependent on one road, back in 1944 with Arnhem, and I don't think many British commanders would like to repeat that sort of error. It's worth also bearing in mind, in terms of this entry of troops into Kosovo, if the reports are to be believed, actually the first troops into Kosovo earlier today were actually the Germans, moving on a slightly different route, heading more towards Prizren in the far southwest of Kosovo. They had actually crossed the border and then were called back. That their reconnaissance troops had actually started the move.
For diplomatic reasons. For
diplomatic reasons. Whether these diplomatic reasons were the ones which certainly all the reports seem to suggest are true, that the Americans wanted to be the victorious force liberating Kosovo, we're not yet sure. However, I think there is one point to make, is that anyone in General Jackson's boots being suddenly given orders which are suspicious in terms of their political backing ought to remind any American general above him of what General Schwarzkopf did in the Gulf War, which is basically tell Colin Powell, the chief of the Joint Chiefs in the States, his boss, to give him a mission and leave him alone. Let him get on with his mission and not to interrupt. Give him support and backup, but not to meddle with the operational detail. And it'll be one of these ones. I think the United States has got to remember this operation is commanded not by General Wesley Clark, the Supreme Commander of NATO forces. It is commanded by General Jackson, who is the operational commander on the ground. And it's nothing to do with actually nations versus each other having diplomatic squabbles. It's called military good sense. The man on the ground is the person who takes the decisions.
Nevertheless, he has to listen to what he's being told.
If he's been given his mission and he's been given what his boundaries, what he can and can't do, if then suddenly someone's coming in saying, well, yes, I don't mind that unit doing this, but I think you should make this unit do that, that is interference, and it goes against British doctrine, American doctrine, German doctrine, it goes against NATO doctrine. General Clark has done his job, he's done it very well. Now he should stand back and let the man on the ground, General Jackson, do his job.
Let's talk a little bit more about the Russian troops, because this is a very unclear situation. 100 Russian troops have headed into Serbia, like a token force. Is it really that few, or do you suppose that there are more?
Other reports have said several thousand.